Hey everybody, my name is Steve SCHNEE, the CD Junkie, and on this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to be talking about one of Ireland's finest bands. That's right, I'm talking about Derry's very own, the Undertones. Now, the Undertones are a fantastic quintet. I first heard them in 1979, and things have never been the same for me. The band actually formed in 1975 or so, and it was John O'Neill and his brother Damien O'Neill, both of them on guitar, Michael Mickey Bradley on bass, Billy Doherty on drums, and Fergal Sharkey on vocals. Now, I don't know if it's Fergal or Fergal, so I'm going to call him Fergal. Deal with it. Now, they formed in Derry, Ireland, and by 1979, they released their debut album. Now, I usually like to start these episodes out by talking about how I got into the band, and that was basically because of a magazine called Trouser Press. In this magazine, they had a one-page article, I think, on the Undertones, and to my knowledge, it compared them to sort of calling them an Irish Ramones. And so I knew that I had to get it because I am a Ramones fan. So there I was, 15 years old, had to get my allowance, and then I rushed off to Licorice Pizza, a local record store, and I bought the first album called The Undertones. Now, this is the American cover, two sides. I'll explain those autographs there in a moment. But this album, I put the needle down, and I had not yet heard Teenage Kicks. I mean, I just read about the band, never heard them. And I put the needle down, and, to this day, I mean, here it is 41 years later, and I could still remember the smell of the inner sleeve. I could still remember the crackle of the vinyl when I put the needle down, and it just blew my mind. I mean, just song after great song. Now, Fergal's voice does take some getting used to. Some people don't like it. I personally love it because it's just, to me, it's another instrument. You know, you have the O'Neill brothers and their guitars, and Mickey's bass and Billy's drums, and then you had Fergal's voice, just another fine element, a fine addition to this great sound. And yes, it did sound like an Irish Ramones, just this wall of energetic, wonderful, melodic pop bliss. Was it punk? Well, some people are going to call it punk. Was it new wave? I don't care what it is. It's just great music. It's full of youthful energy and power and an innocence and charm. But what really mattered was the songs. And this first Undertones album is chock full of them. But let's start with the UK version of the album. This is the actual album cover when it came out in the UK, them sitting on a fence. They actually prefer this album cover over the American one. I prefer the American one because that was the first one I got. But this first album came out in 1979, jam-packed, as I said, full of great songs. CD here does contain bonus material, as you can see there. Now, getting to the American version with the American covers, came out on Rykodisc, and of course, and there's the songs there. You can see that there's a fewer songs than the UK version, but I think those songs actually ended up making the next Rykodisc CD. Anyway, before I continue, the reason I have these autographs is because I went and saw the Undertones when they were touring America for the first time after they reunited, and I ended up talking with Damien O'Neill, and he actually signed all the CDs for me, and then he asked me to take them backstage and have his brother John and Mickey Bradley sign them. So that's what happened. He took all my CDs back. So if Mickey Bradley or John O'Neill see this and those aren't your autographs, then Damien, you and I need to talk. So anyway, that's it for that. In 1980, they came out with their second album, and it was called Hypnotized, and there's the cover there. And Hypnotized, another fine, fine album. Was it as good as the first album? I'd say it's almost as good as the first album. Still a great collection of songs. They had many years to write the songs for that first album, and then whatever they didn't use, or they wrote a bunch of new songs for the next album, and it's still great, still wonderful. These albums, by the way, were produced by Roger Bashirian, who's produced a bunch of great records. Very talented producer. He was actually 1/3 of Blanket of Secrecy, but that's another video for another day. Great band. Still impactful, powerful, wonderful, bunch of great songs. You should definitely check that out. If you love the first album, then you're going to love this album as well. But then something changed. By 1981, the following year, the band had set up their own label, and then they started recording their third album, which is called Positive Touch. And it is, in my opinion, just as strong as the first album, but it's entirely different. You know, that wall of sound is still produced by Roger Bashirian, but that wall of sound, that sort of punky Ramones, these guys were growing up, they were maturing, they had toured the world, and they were expressing themselves musically in different ways. You're going to get songs here that are just as wonderful melodically, but they're not the wall of sound. You know, they're exploring new avenues, and I think it worked out really well. I can totally understand if some people were disappointed by this, but I love when a band changes and matures. It's not doing anybody any favors if you just stay the same for the sake of staying the same. So if you want to mature, and if you want to grow, and if you want your music to reflect that, that's what Positive Touch is. Lots of great songs on here, and bonus tracks as well, as you can see. This is literally the sound of the Undertones maturing, growing up, getting a little bit older, and I love it. And if you were disappointed back when you first heard it in 1981 and you really haven't given it another chance, please go back and do so, because it is really just a feast for the ears. It's really a wonderful collection of pop songs. It took another 2 years before The Sin of Pride came out. And there it is there. And this is a very different Undertones as well. This is them maturing and expanding even more. I think the production of this album, it was trying to sound like a 1983 album when the heart of the Undertones is really just sort of timeless, you know, pulling from all different eras. And I think that was the problem with this. It also sounds like the sound of a vocalist and a band going in two different directions. What's really kind of ironic about this, the bonus tracks on this are unreleased tracks, and they actually ended up being better than most of the tracks that made the album. So if I could reprogram this album, if I could reshuffle it around and re-release it, I would probably take off some of the songs that made the album and add the ones that remained unreleased until the CD release. But after this, though, the band broke up. Now, Fergal went off and he did his solo stuff, first with the Assembly, and then he recorded a single with the guys from Madness called Listen to Your Father. Then he went solo and he had a big hit single with a song called A Good Heart, written by Maria McKee from Lone Justice. So he went off solo, and then Damien and John formed a band called That Petrol Emotion, and they continued. I think John may have dropped out somewhere along the line, but they continued for quite a few years. And it wasn't until 1999 that the Undertones actually got back together, minus Fergal. Fergal refused to be involved with the reunion. So they brought in a vocalist named Paul McClune. Great, absolutely great vocalist. He's not Fergal, and he's not trying to be Fergal. There are elements of Fergal in his voice, so he can do the Fergal songs live, but he's his own person. Again, some people are, oh no, they're not the Undertones without Fergal. Well, I hate to tell you this, but they are. The Undertones are great because you've got Damien O'Neill, John O'Neill, Michael Mickey Bradley, and Billy Doherty. They create this great sound, and Paul adds his vocal where Fergal used to be, and it just works absolutely perfectly. 2003, they released an album called Get What You Need. And that was their first reunion album. Funny thing about this autograph, Paul signed it, and I was there with a friend, Tony, and Paul signed it, Tony, and then realized immediately that he had signed the CD to Tony and not me. So then he crossed out Tony's name and wrote, oh shit, Steve. So I thought that was kind of funny. But this is a great collection of songs. Does it sound like the Undertones of old? No. But the Undertones of old were 20 years before this. These guys had moved on. Believe it or not, musically it sounds closer to That Petrol Emotions. But again, if you want to hear the Undertones of 1979, then buy the self-titled album. If you want to experience the Undertones of 2003, then get this, because it's still a fine collection of songs. Thrill Me is just as good as anything that the band has ever done. In fact, a lot of this is just as good as anything the band has ever done. Definitely worth your while. It took another 4 years before they came out with another album called Dig Yourself Deep. This is another great collection of songs. Now, this does sound like it was recorded during various different sessions, because some of the songs are sonically produced differently, but it's still fantastic. This album is actually closer to the Undertones classic sound than this was. You know, if you've been holding back and you've been saying, well, Fergal's not there, I'm not going to buy him, guess what? Paul is here, and you should buy him. Now, the Undertones did put out one more single. I think it was in 2012, 2013, and it was a record store day only. I've never heard it, which breaks my heart. But as of right now, that's all for the Undertones studio albums. Now, there's plenty of great compilations. You can go out and you can buy any Undertones compilation, and it's going to be great. Anyway, that is it. I just wanted to talk about the Undertones. I love the Undertones. I'm one of those weird fans that once I really hook onto a band, as I did the Undertones in 1979, I stay with them and I support them and I buy their new music. So thank you for sitting around and allowing me to babble about the Undertones. Remember, like, comment, share, and subscribe. But anyway, that's it. Remember me, Steve SCHNEE, the CD Junkie.